warm welcome to all of you here. If everyone can please take a seat, we're about to begin our session. We are so thrilled that each of you are here. Of course, our esteemed guests, but as well members of our community, because we know that there was very mighty competition today, the India-Pakistan match. So thank you all for choosing to be here and to be part of this conversation. Before I introduce our fabulous panelists, I'd like to take a minute to talk about why the Goethe-Zentrum Hyderabad decided to host this series of events, Remembering Gandhi, Questioning India. Now, there's so much to learn and to understand about Gandhi. And this is especially true because he lived such a public, such an open life. He wrote extensively, he disagreed very publicly, and not the least, he welcomed disagreement, and not the least, he grew and he evolved from this very disagreement. His life and his ideals have inspired countless resistance movements and in different contexts, such as Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and even environmental movements around the world. So at the international stage too, Gandhi symbolizes not just the unshakable Indian in a loincloth, but in fact the universal concepts of ahimsa and satyagraha. And therefore commemorating him is very much in line with the Goethe-Zentrum ethos. And while the Goethe-Zentrum Hyderabad or GZH is primarily a German language center, it is also the mandate of our centers to create platforms for important and enduring conversations. And in the words of the incredible James Baldwin, complexity is our only safety. Finally, last but not the least, a special mention about the exhibition that surrounds us today. During his life and certainly post his death, Gandhi was one of the most celebrated and photographed men in the world. The beautiful exhibition that we have around us, and please do take a moment to have a look if you haven't already, is from the collection of the Aditya Arya archive. And we're so happy that Aditya Arya is amongst us today. And the photographer Kulwant Roy, who spent many years alongside Gandhi, took these stunning visuals. And in many ways, this is a history not only of Gandhi, but of India too. So without further ado, and we have a very rich lineup of speakers today, I have the great privilege of introducing our guests. Our first panel is Gandhi and Modern Environmentalism, and I'd like to request our panelists to please join me on stage. Dr. Nishikant Kolge, Dr. Vijay Ramdas, Dr. Lavanya Suresh, Dr. Shiv Visvanathan, and Dr. Usha Raman. Dr. Nishikant Kolge is with the Center for the Study of Developing Societies in Delhi. His book, Gandhi Against Caste, investigates the entire range of what Gandhi said or wrote about caste. Caste divisions over a period of more than 3 decades. I believe now, however, that his research has moved to Gandhi and deep ecology, and I absolutely look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Vijay Ramdas Mandal is with the University of Hyderabad, prior to which he was with the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in Delhi. His research is environmental history and cultural geography, and thank you very much again for being here. Dr. Lavanya Suresh is with the BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus, prior to which she was at the Watson Institute of International Studies at Brown University in the US. Her work focuses on the political ecology of commons in India. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Shiv Visvanathan is with the O.P. Jindal Global University, prior to which he was at CSDS, Delhi School of Economics, as well as visiting professorships at Stanford, Oxford, Harvard, amongst others. His work, amongst other things, explores the question of alternatives as a dialogue between the West and India. And thank you very much for being here. Dr. Usha Raman is with the University of Hyderabad, and most of us here know that she wears many diverse hats. Outside of course, her academic research, she's known and loved for mentoring countless students, being actively involved with environmental and civic issues in the city, and is editor of Teacher Plus, on the board of many organizations, and so much more that she seems to do very seemingly effortlessly. But what I do want to especially mention is that she makes the time to write for both academic and non-academic audiences on topics such as science, tech, environment, health, and feminist media studies. Dr. Raman will moderate our session today, and thank you, Usha, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Urvi, for setting this up, and thanks Goethe-Zentrum and Amita for asking me to do this. It's an opportunity to learn a bit more about something that I guess I have felt in my bones, but not really known about very formally. So I'm really looking forward to listening to the panelists today. So the environment and climate change are a running theme in the news these days, but they also contribute to a layer of anxiety that we carry around in our heads and our hearts. This anxiety lodges itself in many different spaces, those that are personal, where we worry about everyday recycling, using less plastic, making transport choices. It also levers itself into the public and the political. Do we read, speak, and participate in discourses around ecological and environmental movements? Do we align ourselves with conservation and environmental activists? It also takes the form of seeking frameworks that would allow us not only to make sense of a world that is becoming increasingly uninhabitable for many forms of life, but also points to ways in which we might change that course. For environmentalists in India over the past 7 decades, and perhaps even earlier, Gandhi has often offered a convenient and politically powerful starting point for building that framework. Ramchandra Guha, among others, have described Gandhi as India's preeminent environmentalist, even as he has sometimes phrased that is Guha, has phrased that as a question rather than a statement. Whether one speaks of the Chipko movement or the Narmada Bachao Andolan, Gandhi is invoked as the inspiration for the form these movements took, their non-violent resistance to ecological disruption. For instance, Guha says, and I quote, "It's fair to say that the life and practice of Gandhi are the single most important influence on the environmental movement in India." So it's no surprise to find that many scholars trace the philosophical roots of modern environmentalism to Gandhi, even as Gandhi himself may have drawn inspiration from others in his arguments against technocratic development, Tolstoy and Thoreau, for instance. Historian Vinay Lal remarks that while the word ecology appears nowhere in Gandhi's writing, many have pointed to his influence on thinking about the oneness of life. So to what extent is Gandhi's thinking beyond non-violent resistance and an antipathy towards unchecked industrialization and urbanization still inform modern environmentalism? Even as Gandhi urges us to think of the interconnected whole of human and animal, of natural and society, of nature and society, of natural resources and human greed as we build a future, perhaps at the time more distant, when Gandhi's time, conflicts, that is, protecting the wilderness, the dangers of anthropocentrism, the question of forest rights and livelihoods. These are questions that Gandhi did not directly address, but I think he does offer a starting point for these discussions. So we have with us 4 panelists who undoubtedly have grappled with these issues directly and indirectly, And I think we will hear a lot from them on these questions and others that might arise. I'd like to invite the panelists to make brief opening remarks of about 7 to 8 minutes, following which I'm sure we'll have plenty to discuss first among the panel and with the audience. So I will begin with the order that we have on the poster, and this doesn't reflect any particular storyline. Sorry, no particular protocol either. We'll begin with Dr. Nishikant Kolge, whose book Gandhi Against Caste, as Urvi mentioned, explores the man and the myriad apparent contradictions in his life and thinking, and particularly now his involvement with Gandhi and deep environmentalism or deep ecology. So, Dr. Kolge.
I thank for this invitation. I think it's a very brief time, but I would like to begin with two confessions. First is that I don't know anything about the environment, so my comments on environment should be taken as a layman comment. Second confession required bit elaboration. So there are some innocent Hindus, they believe that there is everything in Vedas. So um, we know how the machine fly, we know plastic surgery. So there are some innocent Gandhian also. They believe that Gandhi has answer for the every problem. So there is a violent conflict, the Gandhi knows everything. There is environment problem, then Gandhi know everything. So I am not that innocent Gandhi. So this is the second confession. I believe that he evolved, changed. Okay. So I'm not that innocent, and I believe that Gandhi evolved, changed. Even he said that his writing should be criminated with that. So I believe that it is very risky to say that Gandhi was early environmentalist, though his writings, thoughts, and action can give us some ideas on which we can build something like the environment. So very briefly, I'm going to make a 4 point that today's environment movement can learn or can get some inspiration from Gandhi. First is his critique of modern industrial society. Though I don't believe that there was some concern, there is some awareness about it is going to harm the environment. What the moral thoughts run in his thinking, and basically primarily he critique modern environment society from the moral point of view, but environmentalists can learn, and even his ideas about decentralized village, it is he never think in the terms of development or neither sustainable development, but his ideas, decentralization of productions and distributions may give some ideas on which some environmental movement can do. Second is radical non-violence, satyagraha. We know our moderator also mentioned that Chipko movement, Narmada Bachao movement, they all taken the inspiration from her. He was one of the pioneer who developed non-violence method of the resistance. So he march, there is non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, and I believe many of the environment movement have adopted and has acknowledged also that they have taken inspiration from the Gandhi. This is the another area where environment movement can learn. Third thing, what is I believe I argued in my book also that Gandhi's action were more important than his writing, as I said also. So his lifestyle was also a very eco-friendly. You can say he gave a idea of ecological being. So how long back, when now we started thinking about the recycling, Gandhi was doing long back here. He even the human waste was recycled in Gandhi's ashram, and he was very conscious about all these things. When he was, and he knows how the season works and all that things, and he was very so his life in toto that minimizing one's own need, not possessing anything beyond vital needs. These are the aspects non-vegetarianism. Is non-vegetarian, again, I'm sorry to mention again, religion has nothing to do with religion. It was his own compassion toward the other animal kingdoms. So these aspects also can help us to build some idea about how we can be ecological in the world. And third, fourth, last, and I will stop with that. This is a bit philosophical again. So we have a Judo-Christian idea where idea of the self and other, the man, anthropocentrism is that in Judo-Christian, that man is the center of the and other things are for reason. Even in so we have the another extreme in uh, Vedanta philosophy, where this other world is a just reflection of the Brahman, is a not a real thing. But Gandhi was, my reading says that was inspired by the Mahayana Buddhism. His self was not as autonomous as the Judo-Christian, and itself was also not as a reflection of the Brahma, but it was always in connection with the other. So it is a self, other, and mediums. So what I'm trying to say, so there is a concept of self in Gandhi and also in self-realization, which is inspired by the Mahayana Buddhism, where it says that his self-realization will not be complete unless others also acquire the self-realization. I will stop with one quote where he says, I believe that if one man get spiritually elevated, the whole world get elevated with him. Or if one man falls morally, the whole world falls up to that extent. So this is his reconstruction, radically reconstructing the idea of self and self-realization can also help us to rethink what I'll say, the environment philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kolge, for opening up this debate. I'd next like to invite Lavanya Suresh to speak from her point of view. And as Urvi said, we have a very diverse range of disciplines from which the panelists have come. So I look forward to listening to you.
Thank you so much. I'm quite honored to be part of such a wonderful, esteemed panel. So basically what I would like to point to is climate colonialism. And I think Gandhi has a lot to say to climate colonialism. Now, what I want to introduce is this concept of climate coloniality. So to do that, I would like to point to 4 points. So one is the idea that when we're thinking about climate change, India is one of the most vulnerable places. If you look at the IPCC report, it says that if global temperature were to rise to 1.5, India faces the prospect of being hit by unprecedented climate extremes. We're talking about rising sea levels, we're talking about extreme climate. So in this context, you would think that climate is an apolitical idea, but instead it's highly political. And that's where climate coloniality comes in. Now, I would like to back up this idea of why is it political? Why is this new form of colonization coming through climate? To do that, I'm actually going to take a lot of data from one of the lead authors of the IPCC chapter. She works on the idea of mitigation. And her name is Yamina Sahib, and she gives some really interesting data. So I'd like to just present it to you. She says that when we're thinking about climate change models, right? Climate change models look at greenhouse gas emissions, and it looks at greenhouse gas emissions within a territory. So therefore, every model, every negotiation that we have talks about climate change and the greenhouse gas emissions of a country as per its territorial boundaries. What it does not take into consideration is the fact that a lot of consumption and production that takes place within a particular country also is exported from the global north to the global south. So if you're talking about you wanting to be climate neutral by 2050, what it means is it wants to be an economy with net zero greenhouse gas emissions. What is not accounted for is the export of emissions from the global north to the south. The second point is consumption-based emissions. When we're thinking about consumption-based emissions, we're thinking about accounting for emissions for production along the entire supply chain. And lifestyle consumption emissions of middle income and poor citizens in emerging economies are between 5 to 50 times below their counterparts in high income economies. So when we're thinking about climate-based or consumption-based emissions as well, industrialized countries are where it's growing. So you would think the carbon budget would then belong to countries that are non-industrialized, but that's not true, and that's not the fact, and that's not how negotiations happen. And I've not even come to historic cumulative emissions. Historic cumulative emissions basically look at countries' historic contribution to emissions and the responsibility for emission reduction. Now, if I look at historic cumulative emissions, and I take just two countries, the USA and the EU, that is the EU plus 27 plus the UK, respectively, they account for 25 and 22% of global historic emissions since 1751. Now, why climate change? If I'm thinking about the new environmentalism, that is the topic of this panel, climate change is what everyone's talking about. And if climate change is what everyone is talking about, is this climate change something that is apolitical, something that we can deal with in purely a techno-scientific way, given that I come from BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus? So the complicating that issue is where I come in. And these issues, these facts, and it's really nice to talk in facts and then talk about power and how power operates through these facts, point to the fact that climate justice and injustice does occur. And I've not yet brought up my fourth point, which is the idea of the UNFCCC, when it was set up, basically talked about equity as a principle of addressing climate change, where the fundamental principle was based on common but differentiated responsibility. The reason COP didn't even have an agreement on that, they didn't even talk about common but differentiated responsibility. Wealthy nations aren't agreeable. For example, George W. Bush said that the American lifestyle is not up for negotiation. We have many countries like the US withdrawing and then coming back and then withdrawing again and saying it's unfair for them to actually reduce emissions. At the same time, for example, you have the Brazilian chancellor who said that we need to develop, and that's one thing that even India has said, we need to develop. So where does Gandhi come in all of this? The reason we call this climate coloniality and new climate colonization, I think, was beautifully summarized in this article by Farhan Sultana, and I'm going to quote here. She says, coloniality in lived experience expresses the complexities of colonial power and the ongoing and enduring assaults of colonialism through modernism, capitalism, neo-colonialism, imperialism, and international development and trade. Coloniality relies on racial domination and hierarchical power relations established during active colonization and ongoing in post-colonial space-time, where the colonial matrix of power persists. Thus, climate coloniality occurs when Eurocentric hegemonies and racial capitalism leads to uneven consumption and militarization of climate impacts. It doesn't stop there. She goes on to say, the racial disposability of both those who experience climate devastation in their homeland and those who are displaced as climate migrants demonstrate further climate colonialism. So it brings in the idea that climate change and the way we deal with climate change is not neutral. It doesn't impact everyone alike. It impacts you based on existing social, economic, and political hierarchies. And one person who speaks to colonialism better than most people is Gandhi. And not only does Gandhi give us a form of resistance, he also gives us an alternative. And I'm sure that's going to come up in the discussion. So I'll leave that part of my my discussion of Gandhi giving us an alternative in my next set of comments. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So clearly, we're already seeing different axes of engagement here with Gandhi, and thank you for that. So next we'll move on to my colleague from the university, Dr. Vijaya Mandala, and who is a historian, so this will be, again, a different perspective.
Thank you, Professor Usha Raman, dear friends, and Director Amita Desai and Urvi, Professor Shiv Visvanathan, whom I know personally. Today, my talk about Gandhi and environmentalism. mostly from a historian's perspective. Instead of taking into a kind of Indian historical trajectory, I wish to bring one of the Norwegian philosopher Arnas, who got inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, who advocated a theory called deep ecology. So this deep ecology of Arnas, a Norwegian philosopher, um, was inspired by uh, Mahatma Gandhi life itself. It is not about eulogizing Gandhi or criticizing Gandhi, but how Arnas was personally interested, how Gandhi inspired Arnas, this Norwegian philosopher, to articulate about importance of environmentalism. Gandhi's personal life itself demonstrates the art of eco-friendliness. He lived in Sabarmati Ashram. He studied at University of London, and he was a barrister in South Africa. Then there he faced this racism. Then he came back and he started with Champaran Satyagraha. Um, the Gandhi entry into Indian political domain during the third phase of the national struggle was inspired by in the countryside problems, such as this indigo planters and farmers problem in Bihar. That's when he said that I was not interested in countryside affairs because I didn't know much about what India was about in 1916 to Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Then some lawyers, some then Congress leaders convinced Gandhi that you should take the lead. That's when he took interest in Indian affairs. That itself he transformed into a kind of eco-friendly lifestyle. He given up, like he became like a political sannyasi, political ascetic. Uh, he was not only a philosopher but also an activist. In the case of Arnas, this Norwegian philosopher, uh, he was not an activist. He was inspired by this deep ecology. So deep ecology is a concept um, among the not only environmental historians but also philosophers and ecologists that emphasizes the importance and protection of the environment. Environment such as forest, such as water bodies, oceans, but also protection of the climate and so on. And this needs a kind of understanding among the societies. That is what Arnas was advocating. And he looked and he studied Hinswaras. In Hinswaras, yes, Professor Nishikant said that Gandhi himself was not an environmentalist, not an ecologist, but he inspired, the future generations who took inspiration from his lifestyle and his philosophy of ahimsa and satyagraha, and they began to articulate about the importance of environmentalism. So Arnas wrote two books on Gandhi and how Gandhi influenced his way of life to articulate this concept of deep ecology. So deep ecology is more like an ecocentric perspective that all species on planet Earth are equal. So humans are at the forefront of civilization, at the forefront of the decision making. So it is up to the humans, you have French philosophy, deism. Deism is a concept that God created this world. God does not intervene whether good or bad happens. Similarly, like deism of the French Enlightenment thinkers, Arnos took inspiration of this ahimsa and satyagraha of Gandhian philosophy, then proposed this deep ecology that it is in the hands of humans to take action forward, such as protection of wildlife, protection of non-human species, protection of the river bodies, but also cleanliness of life. Cleanliness is one element of our health. That concept of health is very related to our immediate environment. Especially we are nowadays increasingly living in the urban metropolitan cities full of pollution. So this is where Arnas was advocating about deep ecology. One interesting thing I found, Arnas, who himself identified as Gandhian, um, whose deep ecology is not connected with politics but mostly with environmentalism. protection of wilderness, protection of wildlife. Gandhi himself did not advocate about the protection of wildlife, though his lifestyle was more rural. Sometimes he said that more wild animals are living in the cities than in the forests. So, as an animal historian, I find it a bit, perplexing. Um, Indira Gandhi, on the other hand, the other Gandhi, who was Prime Minister of India, took the Project India Tiger Initiative and took the conservation of the tigers. How India, a tiger became an animal of India. India chosen tiger as its national animal. But Gandhi wasn't advocating about the protection of animals, especially carnivorous animals, dangerous animals like tiger. So that is another kind of a contravention in understanding Gandhian environment. Other thing is this deep ecology. This deep ecology was also inspired by Barry Spinoza and Gandhi, one of the Enlightenment thinker. So here again I see a kind of, we call environmental historians and ecologists call it as biocentric perspective. See, anthropocentric perspective is mentioned by Usha, but there is a thing called biocentric. Biocentric perspective is something we look at that animals, every life on planet is as important as our own life. We consider our life as primacy. So non-human lives are also should have that primacy. So anthropocentric puts man at the center of the universe, at center of this material existential world. But biocentric perspective emphasizes the same kind of treatment should be given to the non-human species, whether it's wild animals, whether it's a deer, it's a peacock, it's bird species, it's like some kind of fish in the river bodies or ocean bodies. So this kind of biocentric perspective was the one this Norwegian philosopher Ornos was emphasizing. And he personally admits, I think there is one American historian, Thomas Weber, who interviewed Ornos in the 1990s. And Ornos was averse to meeting anyone outside. He was very shy. Though he was an influential philosopher, revered figure in Norway, as a Gandhian, he was averse to meet anyone. But this particular Thomas Weber interviewed him in around 1992 to 93. There, Arnas opened up how he formulated this deep ecology and his personal interest in the lifestyle of Mahatma Gandhi. It's not the writings of Mahatma Gandhi inspired Arnas. It's the Gandhi movie which was made during the time of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi that inspired him. So biocentric perspective is the one that deep ecology advocates. Since I also teach environmental history at the University of Hyderabad, I think recently I published a thing called Wildlife Attitudes Among the British Colonizers and Adivasis. I brought this biocentric, under the editorship of Professor Aloka Parashar Sen. I was thinking about Gandhi, biocentric perspective, and Ornos. So, biocentric perspective is the one our present 21st century society have to embark upon. Taking, if we, protect the environment, we protect the wildlife, climate, we are protecting our future generations. We are protecting our human species as well. And interestingly, Buddha in the 5th century, Buddhist philosophy advocates that biocentric perspective. Though whether Arnas knows about Buddha, I do not think, but deep ecology has same kind of a similar kind of stance, philosophical and rational position that Buddhism was advocating between 5th century BC to first millennium AD. I think so. We need to protect the environment, and this is the one historical example of Arnas and deep ecology, which we many historians say in history. So Gandhi himself may not be environmentalist or ecologist, but his inspiration was phenomenal. I think with that I'll stop here. We'll have more in the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. So our last intervention for this round comes from Professor Shiv Viswanathan, who has, of course, written on different aspects of Gandhian thought, as well as our problematic relationship with nature and the non-human world. So over to you, Professor Vishu.
I suddenly realized I couldn't sound as academic as my three colleagues. And the man to blame for that is my old professor Ramchandra Gandhi, Gandhi's grandson. Ramo Gandhi never went to class. He used to give most of his lectures to me in the canteen, saying, "You're the only one who has a skeptical face, and without a skeptical face, you can't be a philosopher." I was talking to him about many of these things. He said, "The first thing you need to be a Gandhian is to be a gossip. We are too reverential to Gandhi. Gandhi had a sense of laughter. And he said, I want to tell you something linguistically. You can't, understand ecology till you understand Gandhi's laughter." And I said, I defy any Gandhian here to tell me 10 jokes on Gandhi. And I went down and started collecting Gandhian jokes. Gandhi was nuts. I'll give you an example. Here is Gandhi addressing, Gandhi meets Mussolini. And Mussolini says, "You must address my troops." And Gandhi said, "Me address your troops?" He said, "Yes." So Gandhi stands up, looks at them carefully. Imagine you are Mussolini's troops. And the only line he says is, "You all look very healthy to me." The bite, the irony, the power in it is tremendous. I remember he used to do the same thing when he was in Manchester. He had gone to look at the closure of the mills, and the British were complaining. He looked around at the technology and said, "No wonder the Japanese are defeating you." He was a panya to the core, understanding the politics of technology. And at that time, I remember Ramu telling me, "You all think Gandhi was a Luddite. You're an idiot. Remember, Gandhi's designer for his charka, Morris Friedman, had 1,000 patents. But Gandhi wanted a more efficient charka. Don't forget it, he was not a Luddite." And then I discovered something even more fascinating. You know, the loudspeaker was introduced for the first time in a Gandhian rally in India. Strange guy. Gets stranger like a mad graphic novel. But I think that's what made Gandhi. In fact, I don't think Gandhi wrote much about nature. For him, a lot of what he wrote about nature was about human nature. But he had a way of thinking about nature, which spread almost like an epidemic. And in this context, I want to just raise 2 or 3 questions. Actually, what I find fascinating about Gandhi was he developed a heuristics for environmentalism. He did not write about nature. He said, "How do I think of nature in operation?" And he said the best way to think about nature is to think about the human body. All of Gandhi's work is on the body as a microcosm of nature. And unless we see this, we will not see the kind of arguments he tried to put. And what I really found really fascinating is, when he referred to nature, the body becomes the model for a certain kind of ecology. Second step, I think Gandhi had a tremendous sensitivity to language. Everyone else said nature as if it was some embossed, standardized thing. Gandhi hardly wrote about nature, but he wrote brilliantly about dirt, junk, obsolescence. I think he had an understanding of the power of the breakdown of the world. I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, you would think, yeah, Gandhi said, the only thing we need from the West is the sewage system. He understood dirt. I think he was one of the great sociologists of dirt. And this was brought home to me by a Dalit activist who I'm working with now, Visvanathan Wilson. Visvanathan turned around and said, "You would think Gandhi and Dalit simultaneously." So I said, "Visvanathan, stop confusing me. Tell me what is it you're saying." He said, "No. Gandhian environmentalism continues today if you can rethink the city." And he said, what we have to do today in India is to rethink the city as a sensorium. Without a compendium of Dalit smells, of stink and sewage, you can't redesign the city. There's a power to it. There is a poetry to it. And in fact, this is something that I want to emphasize, that Gandhi was both practical and poetic in his environmentalism. I mean, let me just push it further. Here is the greatest sociologist of obsolescence. But a man who can combine dirt, junk, and obsolescence understands technology and human beings in a different way. And in fact, what I like about Gandhi is the openness and the pluralism that Ness also talks about. Take the words Swadeshi and Swaraj. This I owe to Rahul Gandhi. He said these were the most poetic words Gandhi created. Swadeshi, he said, is linguistic. Don't look at it as practical. It's the locality. It's the gossip. It's the neighborhood. It's the guy next door. Swaraj explodes into the world, encompassing dreams you haven't yet dreamt of. So Swaraj is futuristic. Swadeshi is contemporary. And I think he used this to say, this is what makes Gandhi the philosopher of the Anthropocene. Because he goes beyond a colonial mindset. He creates a new dualism, which is a complementarity between Swadeshi and Swaraj, between the local as the neighborhood and the dreams of the future. And in that sense, Gandhi was a futurist. What makes him exciting to me is not that Gandhi was anti-technological, but that Gandhi was a futurist who dreamt of different dreams. And I think we need to understand this. And I think it's only when you understand this, in fact, it reminds me of a joke. I remember the American journalist asking Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization? And he said that would be a good idea. Now the story doesn't end there. My friend Urvi has a cartoon where Gandhi is holding an even older walking stick. And he stumbles up and asks Vijay, what do you think of Indian civilization? He says that would also be a good idea. That is the question we are facing today. And that's why environmentalism in a philosophical sense becomes important. We are creating a new resilience beyond coloniality. We need a new idea of the body. You need new kinds of storytellers. And I think this is what Gandhi does. Of all the ecologists, he's the only one who keeps orality alive. Without orality, memory goes. Without memory, ecology goes. And I think this is really what we have to understand. This lecture is more my tribute to Ramu Gandhi, my favorite Gandhian gossip. But there was a part to it. And I think what made him even more exciting was, he said, you got to understand, Gandhi did ecology when he wanted to do philosophy. He said, all you people keep saying, liberty, equality, fraternity. Ramu said, liberty and equality are interesting in the West. But on diverse fraternity, there's zero. The West had no great celebration of difference. It only had tolerance, which is as lazy as you can think. The other almost disappears in the otherness of the self. And he says, this is where diversity comes in. And he said, diversity can only be understood in the Gandhian idea of trusteeship. He said, why can't the Indian constitution create a trusteeship for rice? We have 150,000 varieties of rice. That's 150,000 varieties of dreaming. Why can't we make a part of the Indian constitution that India will protect rice? Not create monocultural rice, but create diversities. And then Ramu said, to create diversities, you need the housewife. It's only a housewife who can cook difference. Cook taste, cook flavor, cook a different dream of ecology. And there the genius of Gandhi lies, because for him, craft, cooking were together. Very few people ever point out the relation between craft and cooking. And he said, you got to understand, the language of craft and cooking is different. It's not a scientific recipe. Language is ambiguous. You know, I realized this when my mother was making a badam halwas. I said, give me the recipe. She said, 2 of this, 3 of that. May not know that this, add a bit more of this. But the very ambiguity of language created a different ecology of understanding. Ecology is about language. And the power language to make you see things differently. I think that's why I understood Raman Gandhi's wisdom. He said to understand Gandhi's ecology, begin with his laughter. Because that will tell you the tragic poignancy of what we are doing. I think I must stop here with saying there are very few real continuities to Gandhi. You have people echoing him, almost like an imitation. But one of the few people I know who created a Gandhian ethic was the scientist C.V. Seshadri. He was a fantastic character. I remember the first time I met him, he sent me a message. One crank should meet another crank. Come and work with me. I think it's the only interesting job offer I've received from yours. But he was right. And the first thing he did was something fantastic. He said, I'm going to combine Gandhi and thermodynamics. Because without thermodynamics, you can't have a constitution. You don't know how to use energy. In fact, you've noticed almost all these environmentalists will talk about nature without talking about energy. And the ones who talk about energy will only talk center-periphery models without cosmology. So you have the same paradigm trying to solve an energy problem with destructive consequences. See, this is why, if you look at the American Anthropocene, they're totally capitalist. As someone cracked, they don't mind the world ending, but capitalism shouldn't. I think these are the kind of biases we need to break. So to me, making Gandhi join the environmentalist movement is a bit dangerous because it's full of conservatives. He was a subversive. And I think the beauty was he thought ecology was a subversive force which eventually created a different kind of unity. So I need a different kind of storytelling. In fact, I remember two debates which are still hanging. One was on khadi. Everyone keeps saying khadi, khadi. Till you meet a guy like Tagore. Tagore told Gandhi, your khadi is mechanical. It lacks a sense of eros. And technology without eros is incomplete. It's one of the most brilliant critiques of technology Tagore ever produced. I think Gandhi understood it. Because his location of the body is to show technology without eros is never complete. Because it's not complete with an ethic or an aesthetic. I think the unsaid part of Gandhi becomes more and more important. The last thing I want to point out is, I think Gandhi had a tremendous sense of indirect violence, obsolescence. I mean, look at COVID. We decided old people were obsolescent and we could eliminate them. What is the language by which we challenge this? Just belting out nature, nature won't do. Because old age seems anti-nature. What is the language? What is the philosophy by which we combat this? I think the brilliance of Gandhi was he left us too many questions to answer. The standard thing on khadi we can tolerate. But his questions about obsolescence, dirt, disuse, violence needs to be answered. In fact, he showed that to a certain extent, Western ecology gets a bit innocent with the real questions of genocide. Even deep ecology of unendness doesn't touch that part. So the question we have in our hands is, here was a comfortable guy who asked too many uncomfortable questions. That's what made him such a loving person. That's what.
Thank you. I think we've traversed a lot of ground, starting from Nishikant's reflection on what the self meant and its relationship with the other, and going to contested vulnerabilities. In fact, from Lavanya's talk, what something that occurred to me was the interconnectedness of vulnerability, and in a sense, the export of vulnerability, or the imagined export of vulnerability from the so-called global north to the global south. And then we end up, with Professor Viswanathan talking about And I disagree that you didn't sound like an academic. I think you very much sounded like an academic.
You got let me be wicked once in a while. We're too well behaved.
Yeah, but thank you for bringing Ramu Gandhi into this conversation, because I think there are many people here who would remember him very fondly from the University of Hyderabad. We have about 20 minutes left. And I'd first like to ask you, the panelists, if you would like to respond specifically to each other, because I know that Lavanya left something hanging and said that you would like to address in your second round of comments. But I'd also then, once you've done that, to come back to Nishikant and ask, having heard the others, what would you then, would you then like to intervene again from your point of view, which is, I think, a little more philosophical than the others, in relation to Gandhian environmentalism? So I'll first pass the mic to Lavanya.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to respond to quite a few of these. So I think the reason why the environmentalism of the West is very different from the environmentalism in India, and I think why almost every environmental movement from Chipko to Envy, as Usha rightly said in the beginning, takes inspiration from Gandhi, because it's all about livelihoods, it's about doing. And Gandhi, one thing about Gandhi was he was a very practical man. Right? He had a utopian vision, but he was very practical. And that's where I would actually disagree when you say that Gandhi is not an environmentalist, because he gave practical visions. So, for example, his ideal village. An ideal village would be a place of self-resilience, where you'll have a garden, where you can grow, where you have dairy, you have a cooperative for the dairy, you have vocational education. What is all this? This is deep ecology. This is the degrowth movement. This is your grow local. All the resistance we have to climate change, all those alternatives have a Gandhian ethic to it. And I think that Gandhian ethic is very beautiful. And as you rightly said, and I loved what you said, is it's in his doing. And you also said, right, it's in the doing that Gandhi actually brings the vision of an environmental alternative. And that's the beauty of it. You can have people who talk about climate coloniality and resistance. What Gandhi gives us is an alternative. How do you resist? So, for example, when he talks of khadi and making of khadi as a form of resistance, just the charkha, just doing that was a form of resistance. And that your everyday life is a form of resistance. And that's climate change. That's our movement towards addressing climate change. And in the Harijan, in Young India, at different points of time, Gandhi even talks about electricity. He says when he was questioned, are you against science? He said, no, I would be happy to have electricity in every house where every person uses their tool using electricity, as long as the electricity is owned by the village. As the grazing land is. He writes this in Young India, right? He says that ownership should be with the people in his vision.
Sorry, he had two notions of ownership. One was the political economy. The other was the epistemic. You had to own knowledge. This came out fascinatingly in a seminar 2 months ago at Chirala at Hyderabad, where a whole group of German historians had come. And the first day they all sat on the chairs and the weavers sat on the ground. 2 days later, everyone sat on the floor and the nature of the debate changed. And that's when one of the weavers is supposed to have got up and said, you not only stole my property, you stole my epistemology. And the German was stunned that the weaver could use the word epistemology. And he said, we don't want property back. We want our theory back. Gandhi had a theory. You see, that's why he went across coloniality. Electricity might begin colonial, but you could rework it. And it's in that reworking that doing became important. Not as an answer, but as a multiplication of answers. Doing was diversity. And this comes out stunningly in an article by Ved Mehta, when he goes to Chandra Mukherjee's ashram. And what does he see when he opens the ashram? Replica after replica of flush tanks. This Gandhian ashram spent all his time trying to understand how to make a flush tank more efficient. Practical, yet as utopian as you can think, because no one has invented an efficient flush tank today. I think that was the interesting guy. He was both utopian and practical. And what saved him was a sense of humor. In fact, this comes out in a brilliant conversation between A.K. Ramanujan and you and Anantmurthy. He said, Indians, we didn't want to reconquer the West. It's too boring. We want to reinvent them. That's why he said Indian colonialism was playful. In fact, that's why Gandhi said the goal of the international movement is to rescue the West from modernity. We weren't thinking about rescuing ourselves. But in fact, we did need a different kind of escape, a different kind of understanding. So I think we could understand this coloniality. Subaltern style has a significance and an important one. But Gandhian style, it's a question of how do you outthink the West? And I think that's the more important challenge today. How do you outthink Trump and China? That gives us a different kind of invitation. Otherwise, we're going to be repeating the same crap here in American universities, which are getting more boring day by day.
See, I think there should be little. Lavanya says that think about Gandhi's village, ideal village. You will have dairy, you will have gardens. I agree with Professor Vishwanath that Gandhi has a great sense of humor. He once said that if I did not have the sense of humor, I would have committed suicide. Actually, he said yes. He said he lived all this life because of his sense of humor. But I doubt that he has a sense of aesthetics. So he was not such uh, environment. His all these things he went he made. It was the in his sector that was the last man. So these village. All other thing you said, it's for the benefit of the last man. And it is also not what deep ecology says. Deep ecology is much deeper. He said deep ecology actually call it shallow philosophy, shallow ecology. Those who think that we need to protect environment for the benefit of the human being. They also says that they are not propagating the environment ethics. They said we are addressing ontological problem, that how we self relate to the other. This is what their primary concern and explaining that thing. So I think we can again. I will push my point that Gandhi was not as the way we understand today ecology or environment, but we can draw some lessons from him. This is again I am just restating my position. Right. One more thing I think I would like to add. Uh, uh, Thomas Weber is not American. He is from Australia. And another thing, on Arlenes read Buddhism also very well. He was very thorough. Even one paper I have argued, I'm going to argue that actually Gandhi means mediated Buddhism to the Mahayana. Means he learned. Uh, what is Arne Nash learn about the Mahayana Buddhism through Gandhi.
Um, okay, I have Professor Shiv Visvanathan and other panelists. Regarding Gandhi, well, we, today's talk is centered around Gandhi and environmentalism, but I also want to bring two criticisms rather than, Professor Shiv Visvanathan said epistemology, how to outthink the West. My take, I think, when colonizers were there, forest officers, some of them, especially from the 1880s onwards, they were also concerned with protection of the Indian environment. When we think about the West or even colonization, we cannot just say that all were British colonizers. They were here just to exploit the natural resources of the country, which was true. But they were also some people were genuinely concerned about the protection of tigers. Jim Corbett, Jim Corbett was genuinely concerned, though he hunted man-eating tigers in Uttarakhand, in Garhwal and Kumaon region. His concern for the environment was self-making effort. Similar like how Gandhi, Ahimsa and Satyagraha was a self-making effort. Other thing, there were two movements. I think one is during non-cooperation movement, there is thing called Motilal Tejawat, one of the person who escaped. He was working as minister in one of the Rajputana princes. He escaped as minister. Then he mingled with the Bill community from 1910s onwards. In 1922, when Gandhi called for non-cooperation movement in 1920, he was organizing the Bill mobilization movement. Motilal Tejawat said, I was inspired by Gandhian philosophy, but I do not believe in ahimsa. I believe in satyagraha. Satyagraha as agitation, ahimsa as non-violence. Motilal Tejawat, this regional leader of the Bill uprising during the time of the non-cooperation movement, did not touch upon ahimsa, but he took the concept of satyagraha. He accepted Gandhi's leadership, and Gandhi distanced himself when Indian press informed that there was a movement happening in the Aravalli Hills under the leadership of a person called Motilal Tejawat, and he says that he was your disciple. Gandhi said that, oh, I don't know who that person is. And this tells about Gandhi's careful exclusion of a fringe movement, which was also so much inspired by environmentalism of the Aravalli Hills. So this is one check upon theologizing Gandhi. There was another as well. I think I'll stop here because of the time and all. Yeah,
So I just wanted to take this opportunity. We have about 7 to 10 minutes. If there are questions from the floor, I can see a hand up there.
So
This mic doesn't seem to be working.
So something that came through in various presentations was that there was this lived-in experience, and that is reflected in Gandhi's actions. And Shiv Visvanathan and Vijay also mentioned the whole question about his association with people, whether they were the people in the rural areas. And of course, Vijay pointed out his aversion to sort of looking at wildlife and so on. But I was just wondering, we are drawing upon various, like going back to Mahayana Buddhism or other influences on him. I was just wondering to what extent his ideas grew from within his association with, on the one hand, with rice diversity and issues like that, which comes from the soil, and the people that he was associated with, because after 1916 he began to get to know India more and more. And second, this whole question of biocentrism, this would come from our own communities, the Bhils and the Gonds and so on and so forth. I mean, we don't have to draw upon earlier ideologies and philosophies. So this is my question. I mean, anybody can answer that.
So,
You put it off, I think.
no, I can see the green light. Yeah, who would like to answer?
Okay, is this book?
Take this.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I respond very briefly. Yeah, Gonds and Baikos, these were the two Adivasi tribes that inhabit South Pura Hills, but also central India. They have a philosophy of environment, which is, I think, not much discussed. I think Professor Aloka Parashar was right that some of the Adivasi tribes, indigenous societies have, much stronger philosophy of environment. They probably come from not literary tradition, but oral tradition. They were much more stronger than Gandhi or even Ornos. I think I agree with that.
I think the most fascinating document we have on this is the one we don't take seriously. This is the documents on the other Shantiniketan. Jagdish Bose, Patrick Edis, Tagore actually dreamt of a second Shantiniketan, which was not based on aesthetics, but on a new idea of science, a new idea of post-Germanic science, of which the Institute of Science was supposed to be the first example. We are not looking at these documents. What they said was, you need tradition to create a post-Germanic science, which you're talking about. In fact, the exercise many people are proposing to be interesting. A collection of Dalits, feminists, other activists rewrite the directive principles of state policy in India. It's a huge blank. We always say it's a promissory note. After 70, 80 years, what do you need promissory notes for? Fill it out. Rewrite the constitution in terms of all our commands. A Dalit vision of directive principles would be stunningly different. It won't be based on the old liberal notion of rights. I think what we have to do is to continue Gandhi's experiments, rather than repeating him like a sloka. We need a different kind of imagination. And I think that's coming more and more. If you look at some of the work being done in science, I think among Indians, I think personally, Amita Reddy, Shiv Visvanathan have done fantastic work. Only, we almost treat them like anti-Indian, especially with this new regime. And we have to think about the possibilities of Gandhi in the next few years. I'm not so hopeful.
So I have a question for Dr. Lavanya and another question that can be answered by anyone. You say that the global north, in a way you hinted at the global north imposing a certain kind of coloniality when it comes to climate change instructions and demands. But within our territories also, if we keep harping on that's the kind of development we want, we ourselves would suffer. Right, so where is that negotiation from within the territories? Where is that discussion happening, right? And also one question about, Gandhi is not, in contemporary politics, it's very difficult to see him as a figure who's without problem, right? The left vilifies him, the right also sort of has made him into the Swachh Bharat, icon, and that's it. So in this kind of problematizing of that kind of a figure, how do we reclaim him in ways that can be useful and helpful for our environmentalism?
So I'm going to answer your question from Gandhi. So Gandhi said, what happens if India apes the West? What we would do is, since we don't have those places to colonize, we'll colonize our own place. Basically, you'll take from the hinterland or colonize the rural in order to grow the urban. And he said that in urban industrial, if we go down that path, the Western urban industrial path, you're going to basically do it by harming your own people and basically by destroying your rural. So he gave the answer to that, and this is why whenever even I talked about coloniality and I talked about how there is this disparity of power, and the fact that I gave you was that the middle income and low income are at this point in comparison with, say, the West. I didn't say the high income. So within a country, there's great levels of disparity in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of consumption, and that is definitely a fact, and that's how capitalism functions in terms of this great inequity that is there. And no one's really, when I work on vulnerability, I talk about how every single policy of vulnerability and resilience is about the poor being resilient, about the poor adapting. What about changing the lifestyles of the rich within a country itself? But it's a complicated, layered, intersectional argument that we have to make. If not, we're not really making a very strong argument. But I do think the reason why I think Gandhi has something to say towards climate coloniality is because he was thinking about colonization not just as a racial form of power discrepancy, but also in terms of its economic violence and looking at alternatives from it.
I have one way to suggest to reclaim Gandhi. This is a Gandhian way. I will say actually it is insult to Gandhi's appeal to rationality to just repeat whatever he had said. He agreed that he failed many times, he did mistakes, he changed his positions, and he himself never accepted any authority. So only way to appreciate Gandhi is to look him critically, because he himself says that he is doing experiment and he never accepts that infallibility. My experiment are the final, so you can keep what Professor Vishwanath, and that we should look him critically, and I think that is what the Gandhian way is.
There's a question in the back.
Thank you, everyone. So basically, like the first few panelists, when we were mostly focusing on lifestyle changes, and the conversation was about like making conceptual shifts, like thinking from going away from anthropocentrism to biocentrism and all of those stuff, and it was filled with a lot of concepts. But taking from one of the panelists who told about Gandhi and ideal village. One that Gandhi sees is a village where it is free of dust. And I work with a whole village of people who are like affected in Tumanapalli. They have to live with radioactive dust every day. It settles in their farms, it settles in their backyards. They have to just live with it. So I want to ask more of a thought experiment. If Gandhi is to enter into these villages today, that there is nothing ideal. Go to Hyderabad, I have three layers of dust every time I get back home, right? If Gandhi is to enter and think about body now, because I work with people whose bodies get injured, that tattered, and we are talking about not your and my lifestyle. We're talking about, when we talk about capitalism and industrialism, the wrap that is got on environment, we're talking about people who are not able to produce anymore in the land and are struggling to produce in a new way. So that is the kind of vulnerability you were hinting at, right, in the last comment. So if Gandhi is to come, and if each of you have your own concepts, so you can talk about probably like how these concepts will play out, or even like how Gandhi will see what body is anymore in this world. Yeah, thank you.
I'll take it in a different way. It's not just a house of dust, it's a house with dusty thought. Now, why I'm saying this is, what Gandhi and others continued, I learned from Ilya Prigogine and Isabel Stenger, the physicists. Last year, 2 years ago in Portugal, she told me, what we need is the sacred back in science. And she said, that doesn't mean we're going to be holier than thou, but we have to understand what holy means. So you have 3 exercises. A challenge to Western epistemology. Nothing is being attacked more than Western epistemics. The new critiques of science are stunning. The new ideas of, and it's not just quantum physics. Anthropocene is churning up this thing into a different way. But then somebody added 2 other things. Remember, the critique of religion is to continue to be religious. The sacred is to come back in a different way. And third, the critique of capitalism. What happens with these critiques? They weaken on one or the other. With Gandhi, we'll have to create a style of life which handles all 3. That's where your dust comes in. It's not so easy. And I think that's where we need to create new experiments. What's missing today is not Gandhian recitation. Every damn politician is reciting Gandhi. But that Gandhi is in mothballs. How do we create new experiments? How do we create the new possibility of experiments? And India has a rich tradition which we don't talk about. The work of the scientists like Seshadri and Amita Reddy. How do you rethink energy? In fact, it's very interesting that Seshadri actually said something very interesting. He said, India can't be democratic till it understands thermodynamics. Because you can't do it till you understand the asymmetries present in energy. We are not asking the tough questions. Our Gandhi is a Rotarian affability. If you ask the poignant question, then we come to the words Gandhi put in life, life world, lifestyle, livelihood, life cycle. You need a science which goes across all of this. And you need an economy that grows across all this. We're not doing it. All we're trying to do is to create a new touristy model of Vata. This regime is not going to do more. People can. Can people join the peace movements? Can people take investigative trips to Northeast, Kashmir? I think feminism has tremendous possibilities for peace. In fact, Ila, founder of SEVA, before she died, wrote this brilliant book on women, work and peace. How the household can capture the imagination of international relations. We're not looking at the traditions that we have. I mean, without any comment on it, how we cite deep ecology. Which Gandhian understands deep ecology? And in fact, it's very strange. You left the most crucial book of earliness out, the pluralistic possibilities of life, where actually it demolishes Popper. Only when you demolish the respectability of Popperianism, then you come back to Gandhianism. I think that's the most powerful statement he made. I think he must have almost taken it for granted. That is what we're looking for. In fact, one of the proposals made now is, before any policy is passed, we have 100 knowledge panchayats, where ordinary people debate a policy in terms of its science, its technology, its possibilities. So anyone from a filmmaker to a poet gives his idea of what that dream means. I think there are tremendous possibilities. I think a group like Navdanya, which is trying to save seeds, or a group like Dastakar, which is trying to bring back indigo color. I think they're tremendous attempts. In fact, it's very interesting. The head of the Andhra cooperatives came to me and said, can you do something for us? Can you build a scientific establishment beyond science? We are tired of Amit Shah telling us that we are a sick industry of 13.5 million people. I think new imaginations, new experiments, new lifestyles have to go together. But the present moment between the university and the regime, I don't. Because the kind of vicious attacks made on dissenters is just this. You attack a Stan Swami, you attack a Pravir Purkayas, then what do you expect? You say, let's not disconnect these debates today.
What part of the movie inspired
Sorry,
you?
excuse me.
What part of the movie?
Who?
We'll be
Gandhi
time.
movie, the
We'll
whole
have a
entire
little time after the panel ends where you can talk offline. So I'll let Lavanya have the last one.
I love the last question. So Ambedkar tells Gandhi, you go to the village, it's a cesspool of caste discrimination, and you are an upcaste Manya, and you don't really understand the village, and therefore your ideal is your ideal. So I get what you're saying, and I really think what you're saying has power. And that's why I think when we're thinking about Gandhi, the imagination, the utopia, the practicality, but that's not where we end, right? We need to understand the structural inequalities. So if you're thinking about blaming a fisher person or fisher person for the lack of fish, if you don't look at the structural issues and the political economy and the capitalism and the neo-capital and the entire coloniality of the political economy that we function in and how that functions, you lose the power and who actually is gaining from it. So yes, intersectionality matters. And yes, Gandhi's ideal is a caste blind ideal. His idea of dirt does not take into consideration the idea of dignity that Gopal Guru brings in very beautifully. So yes, we critique Gandhi, but Gandhi also gives us the vision, but we have to understand it within the power matrix that we exist. So I really liked what you said, and it's awesome that you're doing that work.
So I know this discussion can go on. I know there are other questions in the audience, but we do have to close this panel because there's another exciting panel coming up. So you're welcome to talk to the panelists over high tea, and I will turn the mic back to Amita.
Thank you so much, Usha, Nishikant, Lavanya, Vijay, and Shivji. Thank you so much for this this panel. Agreed that over high tea we can continue talking, and so that the high tea can come to you. We've organized it at the back. And please do pick up a plate, continue so that we can start on time. We are very keen that not a moment is lost in what is happening. I know closing this is inappropriate, but this is a part of the continuum that will continue in the next hour as well. May I request Urvi to please pass on the little tokens that we have. Yes, please go ahead. That is to Dr. Usha Raman. Next one to Dr. Nishikant Kolge. So sorry. Dr. Lavanya. Dr. Lavanya Suresh. Dr. Mandala here. And to Dr. Viswanathan. Thank you.